Well, good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is a council meeting for the Economic Development, Infrastructure, Budget, and Technology Committee. It is approximately 5:07 p.m. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please give us roll call? Sounds so off.
Chairperson Michelle Martinez.
Present.
Councilmember Vicente Sarmiento.
Here.
And just a reminder, folks, this is audio recording only. Please introduce you by your name and title so that the folks listening in will know who's speaking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We do have one member of the public that wishes to speak. Members of the public are allowed 3 minutes to speak on agenda items, matters within the jurisdiction of the committee. And our first speaker is Peter Katz, and our only speaker.
Yeah, we had our act together. We were the only city in California that was up and running on its marijuana shop, so we got free publicity every 15 minutes on all 3 networks for a 24-hour cycle. So they had reporters outside these shops, and so it was kind of interesting to see that we had our act together. But I want to talk about another thing. You know the problem with cash deposits with these marijuana shops. City of Los Angeles, City of Oakland, City of San Francisco are already exploring with resolutions for their own bank in order to get around the federal banking system. This is not a new idea, and I'll just read you the first sentence from their resolution in Los Angeles. The nation's only public bank, the Bank of North Dakota, was created in 1919 in a populist wave when farmers there were unhappy with decisions made by major banks heavily influenced by railroads and out-of-state agricultural interests. Its mission is to promote agriculture, commerce, and industry in that state. Furthermore, over time, the Bank of North Dakota has provided a variety of financial products to the residents and governments of North Dakota, including low-interest student loans, home loans, college savings accounts, scholarships, school construction loans, affordable housing construction and rehabilitation loans, and public construction financing. And to take it one step further, the city of Pueblo, Colorado is the only city in Colorado in the 3 years that they've legalized marijuana. They've created the Partner Colorado Credit Union with the Safe Harbor Private Banking Program. And in just 1 year, that bank has taken in over $20 million, predominantly in marijuana money, and it's going back into the city. So public banks have been around for a very long time, and I think it's a great idea. A city of this size, it will work, and you can do a lot of creative things with that. And because if you get loans, you could create a lower interest rate and drive business to the city. So, I mean, that's an idea that I think it's time has come in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. I appreciate it. We certainly have talked about this in the past between various council members with our staff, and so I think that as we move forward, we will continue to consider those options. So thank you very much for your comments. Next, we're going to move towards approving the minutes from the November 13 regular meeting. If I can get
So moved.
a second, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. We're going to move on to number 3, which is Affordable Housing Fund Policies and Procedures. As Mr. Cosma is stuck in traffic with our rain, so we're going to go with number 3, and then when Mr. Cosma comes, we'll go back to number 2, and I will call on Mr. Judson Brown.
Actually, Mayor Pro Tem, I just wanted to
Rob.
thank you. Just a short intro. Robert Zerschmade, Community Development Agency Director for the TAPE. The presentation that we have for you tonight at our last meeting, you presented us with a number of questions. We took those down and we've provided answers to those. So we'd like to go through those with you, and then we have some recommendations moving forward. So that's a brief introduction, and over to Judson.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Sarmiento and Mayor Pro Tem Martinez, for the opportunity to present this again tonight to you. So to start with a general purpose and intent of these policies, they're to guide how we allocate our affordable housing funds and commit and loan and monitor those funds, and in order to provide a transparent open and fair process for the allocation of our scarce funds for our community, including our land assets. The policies and procedures are very thorough. They cover all of our funding sources, which are also published on a quarterly basis in our Housing Division quarterly report as an exhibit. The amount of the funds in each account. It includes a process to allocate those affordable housing funds through an RFP process. It includes our competitive selection criteria as in alignment with our housing element. It provides how we commit those funds, our loan commitment and closing procedures. It's very comprehensive, as you saw at the last meeting on November 13th. Just a quick timeline of where we've come from and where we're hoping to go. On September 27th, we held a work study with our Community Redevelopment and Housing Commission, where they reviewed a draft of the proposed policies and procedures. And then on October 25th, they recommended those policies and procedures for approval by our City Council by a vote of 6-0. Prior to bringing that to City Council as a work study, we presented that to your committee on November 13th. You requested more information and feedback, including a stakeholder meeting. And we did hold that stakeholder workshop on December 19th, in which 15 developers were present for that workshop. But getting to the meat of our... On some of you.
So a recap of what they, or let's have that recap in here.
I don't have a recap in the meeting. We've integrated their input from the stakeholder meeting. At that stakeholder meeting, we had developers like CNC, AmCal, Jamboree, American Family Housing. We also had the Public Law Center and Kennedy Commission present, as well as a few other developers that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head. But to get into the meat of our presentation today, to answer your questions from the last meeting on November 13th, you started with, first question was, what are other cities doing? And do all other communities have an RFP process for the allocation of their affordable housing funds? We researched with cities of like size and in vicinity of our city, and found that 7 of the 12 cities that we surveyed do in fact have an RFP process. Generally, larger cities have an RFP process, and smaller cities do a sole source award through staff, direct contact with developers. Most, as we can ascertain, most of those smaller communities likely have less development opportunities in their communities and less development funds to work with. In terms of the next question that we received from the committee.
Judson, can we maybe just stop there just for a second? I'm going to keep this a little further away, that way we don't have all the reverb. And
I think you could hear both of us from this distance with the...
Good enough. So I'm trying to make sure we understand sort of the substance behind why some cities decide to abandon procuring and going through an open bidding process, and why some of them can continue to maybe also have, because I think maybe they do both, right? There's some cities that will procure and some cities that can do sole sourcing. So are there any conditions that would warrant a sole source? Timing issues, maybe there's something that is unique to those funding sources that have to be done quickly, or you have to identify somebody. I'm just trying to figure out why, let's say, a city like Huntington Beach would do sole sourcing, or they're not on here, but I believe that they do sole source as well. So I'm just trying to see, like, what's the sort of the schools of thought for both of those.
Thank you.
Let me jump in. I think the primary motivator on this is it's a good government proposal. It provides transparency and a level playing field for all the potential developer participants.
No, we get that.
In the
Everybody
process.
understands why we want to be open,
And
but it's the other one. It's
right,
the sole
and that's
source.
why it's and frankly, on the sole source, I'm not sure why someone would pursue that. For the flip side of the reasons that I just gave, we think, and it's further on in the presentation, that some of the concerns and there's later questions that council member that actually you had raised about missing opportunities, can be addressed in the process, and we've proposed changes to the process to address those. But that's why this is being
Right.
proposed.
Good government, transparency, openness, those are all the sort of principles why we would procure everything, right? Especially when they're public funds. But I guess for those unique circumstances or why communities continue to maybe sole source, there has to be some compelling reason or some rational basis for them to do that. And so that's what I'm trying to get to is how do they justify using sole sourcing? And the only thing that comes to mind is just immediacy of funds, right? Or immediacy of allocating those funds or, you know.
Well, if that is the reason, we think our process addresses that.
Yeah.
We have more description later in the presentation.
I think you'll find that what we're proposing is going to address that exact question of not missing an opportunity, the immediacy of an opportunity that comes available in our community. If I may
Sure,
continue,
go ahead.
I promise I will get right back to that question. In terms of have we done any outreach to developers and housing advocates? As I mentioned, we held a stakeholder workshop on December 19th. 15 developers were present, provided us with significant feedback and discussion. It was about a two-hour workshop. At the end of the workshop, I asked the question if were all the developers in favor of the policies, and they were, and they appreciated our efforts to maintain a fair and transparent process. How would these policies and procedures allow sufficient time to avoid not meeting funding deadlines? And what are the deadlines for the tax credit deadlines? So these proposed policies and procedures would align with other funding deadlines issued by the state and federal government, including the 9% tax credit deadlines. In terms of when those exact deadlines are, the first competitive application funding round deadline for 2018 is on February 28th. And the second competitive application funding round deadline is on July 2nd this year. And our proposed process will align with those deadlines to ensure that that the projects that we award funds to will be competitive for those grant application cycles. How do the policies and procedures compare with our current practice? Our proposed policies and procedures actually memorialize our past and current practice for allocating our affordable housing funds. What are
Very
instances?
quick
in
question,
which-
Judson. Are these proposed policies and procedures memorialized and put on the website, so for developers to actually review, or the public?
So with the approval and adoption by City Council of the proposed policies and procedures, they would be put onto our website.
But in the past,
for
we did not
public
have, we did not have these policies and procedures memorialized?
review. No, Mayor. Pro Tem.
Okay, fantastic, thank you.
Next slide. Next question that we addressed from the committee from November 13th. What are instances when we haven't followed an RFP process? So in contrast to our past practice, City Council recently approved sole source awards to development projects including AmCal's First Street Apartments project and Community Development Partners' Tiny Tim project. And that was on June 20th, which led to the City Council direction for us to adopt these policies and procedures.
You know, just one caveat that I would add to that is that if you go back, there's a history of sole sourcing in this city. So even before AmCal, Tiny Tim, we can go back, 20 years, and I think there was a lot, it was mostly sole sourcing. There was very little bidding going on. But I think that's where we're trying to maybe modify the process, where we can maybe start introducing this as a requisite, right, to allocating those funds.
Yes. The next question the committee asked, how do the policies and procedures allow for an opportunistic process so the city will not miss out on an opportunity? That's similar to the question that you asked Councilmember Sarmiento. We've drafted changes to the proposed policies and procedures, which we'll discuss later in the presentation. Next question from the committee was, how long does the RFP process take? We looked back at the last 5 years of all the RFPs that we've issued, and the RFP process generally takes on average 120 days. However, in response to the expressed desire from Councilmember Sarmiento as well as the committee for an opportunistic process, we're proposing an open RFP process to be discussed later in the presentation. The next question from the committee was, are the policies and procedures in conflict with our housing opportunity ordinance? No, under page 12 of the draft policies and procedures that you have in front of you, you'll find that we quote directly from the housing opportunity ordinance section where a developer's input on their in lieu fee payments shall not be dispositive. The in lieu fees collected by the city are city funds over which the city has complete and absolute discretion. However, if a developer chooses to provide that input, we stipulate that the developer must provide their input within no more than 90 days of when the payment is received, and that the developer's requested project would receive 5 bonus points through our RFP process outlined in the draft policies and procedures in front of you. In terms of the next question, in response to the next question from the committee, can staff provide an initial analysis of the recent housing legislation passed by the state of California? I'm happy to present in front of you a memorandum from Mr. Schmid regarding a summary of recent housing legislation approved by the state from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as Goldfarb and Lippman. And this summary provides all of the legislation that was approved and signed by the governor in this most recent calendar year, and we'll hopefully answer that question for you.
Anything in there that that's notable, that might be important for us to.
The SB2 is definitely, the permanent source for housing is definitely something for us to look forward to.
And cap and trade.
And cap and trade, absolutely.
Real quickly, Judson, on this here and on the cap and trade, the city is yet to go out and go after those funds. Typically, it's only been the development community, and we've partnered up with them. But why aren't we taking advantage of the cap and trade funds and allowing the developers? I'm okay with having 1 or 2, but 3 now, and the city yet to go after those funds. That's, we need to do all we possibly can to get those funds. As we all know how we get cap and trade funds. Look, our utilities specifically, our electricity is continuing to go down. I think the last time Francisco presented, it was an 8% decrease. And so we need to recapture those dollars, and we need to recapture back through cap and trade for housing because there's an imbalance. And so we need to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
We'd be happy to follow up
Thank you.
on that. Because frankly, I'm not sure if we would, absent a project in hand, what the application eligibility guidelines are, but we can check on that and be happy to circle back.
Great.
Yeah. And another legislation that was important was the Palmer Fix, AB 1505. And our city, in terms of our housing opportunity ordinance, is on the cutting edge in terms of ensuring that we comply with that Palmer Fix, as well as doing our most to initiate more affordable housing, provide more affordable housing. In terms of the next question for the committee, how do the policies and procedures compare to the city's procurement policy, and/or how would the adoption of these policies affect future procurement citywide? These policies and procedures align with our city's procurement policy and would not affect future procurement citywide. And the city's procurement policy is actually more stringent than these policies and procedures. Next question, how is our process responding to our current housing needs identified in our housing element, an important guiding document for our city? And what are our goals for affordable housing in the city, and how are we going to tie the money we have available to those goals? So the goals and the proposed policies and procedures are based on our housing element. If you look on page 11 through 12 of the proposed policies and procedures, you'll find the competitive selection criteria. And the competitive selection criteria starts with the priorities to significantly increase affordable housing opportunities for large families, including 3 and 4 bedroom units, to benefit a higher percentage of units for extremely low-income households, that the projects are cost-effective with low operating costs, incorporating green building techniques, and have a path forward to achieve the lowest possible per-unit subsidy for city financial assistance, and increase affordable housing opportunities for special needs populations, including homeless individuals and families, persons with disabilities, and seniors. It aligns with our housing element needs. But let's take a look at the next question from the committee in terms of what has been our shortfall in the housing element, and what are the proposed projects, and how do we align those proposed projects to our housing element. So if we look here, we provided our current total RENA as well as our RENA progress as of December 31st, 2016, that was provided to council in a staff report and receive and file staff report. And our total remaining regional housing needs allocation for the city of Santa Ana for very low-income households is 136 units, and for low-income households is 90 units. Now, with the new projects under the leadership and direction of our council, the new projects under development, we have a total of 376 units that will be developed over the next couple years for very low-income households, and 141 units for low-income households. So we will exceed our RENA allocation through the projects that have already been approved by our city council.
Just for the record, Judson, can you just state what very low and low calculate to? In other words, what's the salary of an average family? And that way we kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. Because sometimes when we say extremely low, very low, it kind of confuses the discussion.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, off the top of my head.
Well, if we don't have the, I think we would have an idea of what the salary would be.
Not off the top of my
Or the
head.
median.
Well, but you know what median is for the county.
Roughly 85,000.
Okay, and then very low is 50% of that.
Yep.
So for a family of four, it would be about 40,000 a year, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then low would be from 40,000 to 70-ish
Yep.
for a family of four.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So
it's not exactly the answer to your question.
No, but that's
Yeah,
a great
sorry.
example, right? So, because it gives us some tangible numbers that we can work with and say, okay, our demographic is, how many of our families, number one, we have families that are much larger than four.
Right.
But how many of them meet that threshold, right? That
Not even
amount?
close,
Not
Probably
even
very,
close.
very few, because we're talking about AMI based upon county numbers. And we're way at the very low end, right? So that's where I guess, if we were to go to, this is very low,
Extremely low.
extremely low, is that 30% or
30%
30,
AMI.
right?
Yes.
And that's
So then
where
we're
our needs
talking
at.
maybe, that's where the fit is
Yes.
closer to what, we're trying to address, which is difficult because the subsidy becomes very large at that
Right.
point. And that's where I think there's a little bit of conflict with the previous page on 11 and 12, where we have a path forward to achieve the lowest possible per unit subsidy for the city financial assistance. So I guess that's a policy decision, right, where we have to say, are we willing to maybe introduce less units but at a higher subsidy
Subsidy.
because we know that that's where the need is. And that's where I think the council and the staff need to figure out, do we need to somehow adjust?
Well, we will take another look at that before this would come to council. I think that's an excellent point, because there's a tension
Right.
between those two objectives.
Right.
And we should take a look at the point ranking.
Absolutely.
The points assigned.
I think it's exactly the kind of discussion we need to have to give staff better direction so they can introduce this to the development community.
Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then as well, the number of units, for example, at the Tiny Tim, that when they initially presented, they were more on, they were providing very low units, but also moderate and low income units. And we asked to make that change. And so I guess for me, it's more about, what are the goals of the city? I understand RENA, and that is just, from a growth of what we actually have to, what we're mandated by the state, but doesn't mean that we're going to build, right? But obviously, we are surpassing that number based on the very low and low, but not extremely low, which is the need of our city. And so I would just ask for us to put numbers so that we actually can attain those and have goals and saying, per each of these very low, this is how many units we want to strive for if we're giving them these funds. Obviously, with the Tiny Tim, we made recommendations to make that change because they only had 11, right? So we're saying let's equal the playing field because that's where our need is. And so just wanting to make sure that we're able to articulate that as well, so that we actually know what we're trying to achieve. and the developer understands what, what the council's policies are and what and what we're trying to achieve as well.
expectations, yeah.
And their expectations and predictability. They may say, you know what, this is way too much, I'm not gonna apply for this. Others may say, you know what, Santa Ana's in the right track, we're gonna go ahead and apply for this because we wanna help Santa Ana meet these goals.
I think that, again, goes back to the points, the point ranking, which we will definitely take a look at, because I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
Let's see, moving on to the next question from the committee on November 13th was how much do we actually have in our affordable housing funds? So as of September 30th, we have roughly $3.5 million in our total affordable housing funds available for affordable housing development. And these funds are published on a quarterly basis in our Housing Division quarterly report as an exhibit. The next question, how are we investing in home ownership? The city offers our $40,000 in down payment assistance through our down payment assistance program. We also work with developers such as Habitat for Humanity to offer affordable home ownership opportunities to Santa Ana residents. And our housing opportunity ordinance in those circumstances when the developer opts to build the units on site, we do have those those units available through our made available through our housing opportunity ordinance.
Quick
But
question,
in-
Judson, on this ownership and where I want to move towards more the development community so we could actually help get more home ownership. When we ask for 40,000 down payment and just say that their loan that they're receiving from the FHA from the federal government, is $500,000. Just say that's all they're able to get. Obviously, there's limitations with that and where they can buy. I don't think there's really many places now here in our city that you can get a reasonable, nice home for a family for $500,000.
Well, it's interesting. Just today, Edgar Garcia in Raul's office puts out maybe you received it.
Yes, I did.
compilation.
I read it.
6 zip codes in Orange County at under
Three of them.
500,000, and several of them were in Santa Ana.
Yeah.
But it's very,
It's very,
this-
but where in those locations? And so I'll tell you that a friend, qualified for $525,000. He just has a newborn child. And both he and his wife work, and essentially he wanted to live in a nice neighborhood. He wants to raise his newborn child, wants to feel safe, and obviously the only where he was able to was in an area that isn't that safe in the city, and didn't want to raise his kid there. And so I definitely understood, and he asked me, well, what is the city going to be doing for young people like myself? I'm a millennial. I want to keep my wife here. I want to have a backyard for my child. It's not true that millennials don't want to live in tiny homes. They too want to have a backyard in a regular house, and obviously that's not attainable here in Orange County or across the state of California much, and so if we are able to partner up with the development community, because what we have to do at the federal level in regards to what they're able to qualify, that's at the federal level, and we got to deal with that on maybe with our congressmen. But with the developers that we're working with and we're willing to provide home ownership, how can we figure out ways to partner with them where we're able to leverage and actually help also subsidize that home ownership within that development to give more opportunity for home ownership versus folks just renting.
It's just the rise in housing costs. I mean, I remember when these programs were new, and originally they were like $20,000, and then went to 25. They got up to around 40. They just became, even when the redevelopment agencies were still in existence, it just became very expensive on a per unit basis. I don't know what the solution is. I know 40,000 isn't enough to move the needle.
No.
It's basically, I mean, at a $500,000 sales price, I mean, it'll help pay your closing costs.
Yeah, that's pretty much
put
it.
a few bucks toward a purchase price. And but this is what we're doing today, and I totally agree that there ought to be some other tools out here. We don't have them in connection with this policy. But we did want to enumerate.
But whatever we
what we
can
are
do
doing.
to find ways, and looking at what other cities are doing, I think it's imperative that we do that. As 49% of 49% renters here in the city, 47%, 48% homeowners. Obviously, We're a predominantly Latino community. Latinos do want to have purchase homes. That is American dream. And we got to do everything we possibly can to figure out how can we help. I remember in the 90s, and my friend too brought this up, he mentioned, he's like, when we graduated from high school, do you recall, Michelle, that there was this program available that if you graduated from high school and you graduated from college, that, the city would help you purchase a home. And I was like, look, I don't recall. Back in that was a long time ago. And I recently sent the email to our city manager that we used to have some kind of program like that we would do everything possible for those that graduated from high school, went off to college, and came back and wanted to raise their family, wanted to work for the city, and we were provided that opportunity. I think it's a perfect opportunity for us to look for a pipeline, as many folks here in the city are starting to retire. We need to build a pipeline, and so creating that bridge with our college district, our schools, and trying to figure out what can we do to make sure that we retain that talent, because we have a lot of talent in the city, and they may be leaving because they can't afford, they don't want to rent, they want to afford to purchase a home, and we should, again, do whatever we possibly can to help them attain that.
I think the problem's larger.
Yeah.
It's so large, it's probably beyond us, right? But to the extent that we can, whatever we can do within
Yes.
our own, ability.
I think the
perhaps is a-
suggestion to take another look at this and look at what some other communities are doing, they may be in lower cost markets, but there may be some approaches that would be applicable here. I'm happy to do that.
Great.
Happy to.
And thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem Martinez. And in addition, in response to City Council comments, when we would bring forward our inclusionary housing agreements for the acceptance of in lieu fees at previous City Council meetings, we are now requiring a developer who elects to pay the in lieu fee to explain the basis for their request. And so we want to ensure our developers are justifying exactly why they're deciding to pay the in lieu fee instead of building the ownership units on site.
So can you go back to that
yeah.
point real quickly? Sorry, just water break.
Water break. Thank you.
So remind us again how what the language in the WHO is. I thought that it was not a requirement, but it was a very strong goal that the units be built on site. And in the event, and I think that's where you're trying to address on this footnote, in the event you can't build, and there's got to be some compelling reason why you can't build, then you're given this, this option. Right? Is that the way the language is in the WHO now?
So the language in the WHO right now provides a developer with the option to either build the units on site or to pay the in lieu fee. And so what we're trying to do here through this administrative process is that they need to justify and provide that compelling reason on why they're deciding to pay that in lieu fee. And we understand at the end of the day they're able to exercise that option, but we want them to document exactly why they're making that decision.
Yeah. But I guess they could refer back to the ordinance and say, well, look, you're putting this obstacle in front of me when it's one of my options that's available to me by the language of the ordinance. So I think even if we try to administratively try to have them explain, I would certainly argue as on their behalf, or if I had a client like that, argue, look, the language of your ordinance says that this is an option and alternative that's available to me. So would we have to go back and modify or amend and adjust the language in the ordinance?
I think you would. I think from a developer's point of view, I would probably ask, show me where it's written that I need to do this.
Right.
This has been put in place administratively. It's not in the ordinance. If there's a desire to tighten that up, then we should probably include that in a review of the ordinance. I know there's some other issues with it that are going to be coming back to the council.
Okay.
This might be one.
Right. I think you're right. Thanks.
And so the next two slides provide the proposed revisions that we have made in response to the committee comments. The first and foremost proposed revision is to provide for an open RFP process. This allows for us to not miss an opportunity that comes available, say a grant opportunity or a good development opportunity. Provides for an opportunistic process The concept here is written and described in full detail in our under page 9 of our policies and procedures. Is that proposals may be submitted at any time, and the RFP is continuously open throughout the year. How it works is that we will establish a quarterly review of proposals. So each quarter, say mid-quarter, February 15th, May 15th, each quarter we will close out the proposals that have been received, and then review those proposals and determine whether or not the review panel will recommend those proposals to move forward for City Council consideration.
So no one is ever more than 90 days away from a review. That's the maximum.
Just really quickly on that point in regards to Councilman Sarmiento's the sole source and why cities do that or not. I don't like to call it sole source because I think this is a little different than other contracts that we go into. For me, what this is by right. How do we provide by right funding for housing? And when I mean by right for housing for funding, that we put goals and objectives based on what we want to do with our funds. And that says, we want to build low-income housing, X amount, and if you're able to do X, Y, and Z, by right, you don't need to go through us. The city council's already approved. You can go ahead and go and seek that funding. But again, there's predictability in regards to what the council's policies and procedures are, but more importantly, it's housing goals and objectives that are met with those funds of dollars. And so as we move forward, look, when I look at this point, regards to point and what you could get a point for or not, I'm not a really big fan of that, specifically on the housing end. And so I'm not sure what we want to call it when the opportunity comes or not. But I just think that, again, time is money for these developers. And, I think it's very important for us to figure out whatever mechanism or whatever terminology we want to use. But I think we should figure out, and maybe the wording that I'm using is a little extreme, but by right funding for housing based on our goals and objectives of the housing that we want to meet within year 1 to year 3, so that we actually know exactly what we're going to build, and the developers are going to go and help us accomplish that.
Well, if I could just respond.
Yes.
I think but nobody likes these point systems.
I don't like them.
They're hard, I mean, whether, and I don't care whether you're doing a personnel recruitment or you're doing a housing review. But I think by carefully crafting those points, that's where you embed your policy in the review. And the other reason you need a point system is to be able to rank competitors. And if developer A is proposing, deeper affordability and lower cost, and then the next developer, that should manifest itself in the points. And so that's why we don't automatically jump to a point system just because we like to do the arithmetic. It is a tool. It's the tool that we can use to develop a ranking so that we can make a fair and impartial recommendation to the council.
I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, I think what I see is, let's say there's a developer that looks at the housing element and says, here's an area of the city that the city council has prioritized as in need of good, affordable housing. They decide to build on site. They they make a commitment to have deep affordability. How do we help them? How do we encourage that, right? And the point system, should work. I mean, in theory, but in practice, sometimes it really falls short unless we tighten up the criteria, right, in the language, to make sure that there is the benefit that is going to be given to this developer that's gone out of their way to say, I'm following everything that
To meet our housing
right,
element
that the policy
goals.
direction is there, right? So to the extent that we can not just incentivize or encourage, but help that developer be successful because it's meeting the needs and the policies that I think we've set as a council, because we know that that's what the city's needs are. So that's where I guess, getting from point A to B and it being very practical and it being very effective, that's just where I think, I guess that's the nut that we have to crack, and that's what's difficult.
I mean, I think, from the dialogue that we've had at the last meeting and the dialogue we've had here tonight, we can certainly go back and take a look at our point system. I think I hear where you're going. The other thing that I think we all need to realize is that this system, this isn't going to be cast in stone and then we forget about it for 20 years. It should be reviewed each time we update our housing element. And maybe, at least, during that period of time where the housing element is in place, we should be just at least reviewing it kind of annually against kind of, well, what have we achieved? Are we going to shift things a little bit? But I think if we use the housing element and the goals that are in there along with the expressed desires from this committee, I think we can adjust the point rankings to emphasize that.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to figure out how do we do two-step process, because I get what Councilman Sarmiento is saying, that why certain cities do a sole source and why they don't. And so, again, we're going back to the housing element and the arena. The housing element, a lot has to do based on state, and federal mandates. Santa Ana is very different from other communities, and even though I respect the RENA process, that number is still very low of what it's asking us to do.
You know what I think a good comparison is? It's a minimum standards
Yes.
versus desired outcomes.
Exactly.
And the RENA is a minimum standard.
And if we have this higher desired outcomes by right, you get by right funding if you're able to do that, right? But you have to be able to, meet all those needs to get this by right funding. If not, then you have to go, if you're doing the minimum standards, then you go to that section and then you have to compete.
But that's why I think that's where I was getting at with my.
But you gotta have
my
policies in
question.
place.
Is that the reason why you sole source is because you want to have that developer that's playing by the rules and meeting all the policy requisites that we've set for them. You don't want to punish them. You want to encourage that. Sole sourcing appears to be one of the ways to do that because they could get lost in the competitive bidding process because we know it's an imperfect point system, right? So that is one
But
additional way.
I think if you set your criteria to value what you're trying to achieve,
Yeah.
that's going to. I mean, everybody has to compete, and I think you'll have people. They'll take a look at that. They'll and there'll be briefing meetings, as we go along, and so people are acclimated to our process. But I think if we can make it very clear to the development community, like what it is we're seeking, the level of affordability. I think those things can be
But
made
there's
clear.
also other things beyond, and we'll get to it because I know we have to move forward, is the others where some of these developers asking for, way over the top, beyond the gap, financing, and they have to go to the state and federal government to get all this financing. But what if you have a developer that is for profit, that actually wants to build affordable housing, and they're not asking for any state subsidy, so they don't have to wait to get the tax increment funding, but, hey, we have this property available, we want to do this now, we want to be helpful, we're only asking the city to help us meet this demand, and we're not going to anyone else, right? So I think there are developers like that that are not always going to go and seek additional finance. Every developer that's come before us, not only seeking city financing, they're seeking state financing, they're seeking federal financing. We have to go through this whole process, and by the time we develop and build this housing and all these requirements, we're 5 years down the road.
I agree.
Right? So how do we figure out a way to streamline this process that we actually help facilitate, these developers to get in and out if we're able to really firm up this criteria? And again, I'm calling it by right funding for housing based on our goals and objectives. I really believe we got to take two steps. So, you're in the biz, you've been doing this. I'm not an expert, but as I look at what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to do it, and because of the need here, not just in Santa Ana, but throughout Orange County, we have to figure out another way and be creative. And so I would those are my last points to you all.
I guess the problem that I've got with what you've said is I've not seen a project that didn't require these other levels of funding.
Well,
And I mean, if somebody came along, if let's just say Bill Gates came in and said, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars, and I don't need affordable housing tax credits, I don't need cap and trade money, but I do need I need something from you, some level of participation. If that unusual eventuality were to present itself, then I think what we would do is we would drop it into a review and bring it to you quickly.
You know, we could give additional points. I think this is Raul Godinez, city manager, for those listening. I think the criteria can help address some of the priorities. For example, if the ordinance does not currently address incentivizing building on site, we could give bonus points for that, additional points for those people who are going to do that. And that development would go to the top.
Exactly.
If we had somebody like a Bill Gates scenario, somebody who
Like the Lions
could
Group.
self-fund most of
They're a
it,
great
then
example.
they could get additional points. I think we shouldn't
could've did
focus on
more.
self-funding so
If we
much
would've
as
provided
the
more
desired
funding.
outcome, which is not self-funding, it's really timeliness. I think we should look at timeliness and award points for those that are able to deliver more quickly. I definitely agree that the criteria is really key to getting the goals of the council accomplished. We just have to craft them. We just have to know what they are and figure out how to incentivize that behavior.
I know we need to move on to.
And if I may,
We're almost to the end.
yeah, almost to the end. And if we're not moving quickly enough, we're proposing a city council initiated proposal review process, where a city council member may request review of a proposal. In turn, if a council member requests a review of the proposal, then the developer would need to pay for the analysis that we conduct through our regular process by organizations like KMA. And then once we receive that analysis from KMA, we would then present that real estate analysis and the proposal back to City Council for direction without any staff recommendations. And that gives you the opportunity to say, I want this proposal considered, but at the expense of the developer. And just as a side note, we spent over $20,000 in reviews by outside real estate analyses for projects that were council driven, and so this is a second process that we'd be proposing.
So just on this point, I think that, it's a really good effort to try to add additional scrutiny to make sure it's considered. But couldn't somebody as well, say they're not favorable to a development, and they know that there's a deadline for that developer to qualify for, tax increment dollars, and they say, well, look, I don't really see this proposal as being viable. I'd like to have it analyzed. It adds another, I don't know how long a proposal review would take for, let's say, a KMA to do something like that. But I've seen projects, and I've seen them in the recent past, where somebody just wants to put a wrench in the momentum of that project and that proposal, and say, look, I don't. Even when there's been a previous proposal done, they ask for a second one. And so I guess I'm trying to see, this is a well-intended review process, but I don't want it to work against somebody either, right? So let's just say staff has done a review of a proposal, and then it goes to council, and council, for some reason, doesn't trust or doesn't believe that review was thorough. You're going to ask the developer to pay for a second review, and you're going to cause delay to that project. So I'm just trying to save these good projects from ourselves, because, as we know, it's a political body,
Right.
and we also have to be realistic that we're doing this with good intentions, and we'd like to have everything based upon the merits, but that's just not the case.
Well, the thing about these two alternatives that you have before you, I mean, really, if I was a developer, I would just pick the open process, because I'm never more than 90 days away from a review. I'm not being asked to pay for a review. I know what my ranking points are going to be, going in. But this, we heard at the last meeting a desire to have an opportunity for council to propose projects for review, and so that's how we ended up with a second alternative here. But I think from the point of view of the developers, and I think we heard from them on December 19th, is, and these are the ones that are very active in this market. They were happy with, what we were proposing to bring forward, because it's a known. It's something they can learn and become used to in day-to-day business.
The remaining proposed revisions are simply primarily administrative bonus points for input from the developer for the allocation of their in lieu fees. That the in lieu fees would not be considered available funds. That way, developers couldn't provide that input until they actually pay their in lieu fee payment. Clarification to our labor and wage requirements, monitoring requirements, relocation requirements, modifications to our sample competitive selection criteria table to make it more clear and to clarify the
On the criteria
categories.
table, just as well, one last thing that I would just include is the time period to build this housing, to base on the tax increment funding that they need to go after. You know, there ends up being, you know, a long period of time before we actually develop the housing. And so I'm going back, we need to build housing now, right? And these projects are 3-5 years away, right? We keep on saying we're going to be bringing affordable housing. We're bringing we're bringing affordable housing 3, 5, 6 years down the road because they don't have all their financing in place. They have to follow requirements from the feds and the state. And so again, I just, we had this conversation at SCAG within our housing committee, and that's kind of the frustration from a lot of the councils across, the region. And that's what they were saying is that, we need this housing now, but because of these developers having to go after this additional financing, it's taking a long period of time. And then the market changes, and then housing prices go up, and the cost of construction. And so just need to figure out somewhere in the criteria how, if those that are not seeking that funding, they get more points because we're going to be able to build that house within 18 to 24 months.
You know what? We can very easily do that.
Great.
I just don't think you're going to see any of it.
Well, you never know.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But it's just that they need these other sources of money that make it work. And why don't you go to the last slide, Judson?
Yeah, of course.
Now, we had targeted a work study session with the entire council on January 16th. We got a few comments here from you
Yes.
tonight. We would like to go back and take a look at those. So we may need, Mr. City Manager, we may need to trail this to that first meeting in February.
And can we get a copy of that when you do put all the finishing
sure.
touches to the policy so we can review it? You don't have to come back to us, but before it goes to the full council to make sure that our points were put into the policy procedures.
Yeah.
Great, fantastic.
I think that would be fine.
And I wanted to clarify, I know that we're calling it sole source, but really, they were really unsolicited proposals, basically, is what they amount to. Nobody's reaching out to them, they're reaching out to us, but they're reaching out to us absent an RFP process. And so I call them, in other cities, we've always called them unsolicited proposals. They just come in, and we weren't necessarily asking for them, but they're on point, and then you have the option to consider them. By having a continuous RFP process, it will help us be sort of in the driver's seat. We're always sort of driving the agenda instead of reacting to a well-intentioned proposal that just we weren't, But I think that's probably, as I'm hearing sole source, I'm thinking, well,
I don't like
it's
that
more
word.
it's unsolicited proposals is really what they are.
Well,
Yeah.
we can call it by any term. I guess it's sort of circumventing the competitive bid process, right? Where you're
Right.
competing for those funds equally with others. So I don't think there's anything notorious or sinister about it. Sometimes it's done because there are good intentions. Maybe because you realize, okay, here's a project, it's really important. It's going to be sited in the right place where nobody else wants to build, and we just want to make sure that it's successful, right? So I think there are those well-intended projects. I think they're justified. I think they're reasonable. Obviously, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem and many of my colleagues is that the preferable, obviously, is to competitively bid, to procure, to go through a process. I just think, that is always the much better process. It's a defensible process. It's something, but I've seen those processes also sabotaged, because the criteria isn't strong and it's not specific enough. And to the extent that we can really embed good language in it and make it really specific on what we want, and that's where I think the council needs to be very clear and say, our priority is that we build on site, and there's no doubt about it. And our priority is that we go really deep, not moderate, because Look, everybody wants to build moderate, but what's moderate? Moderate, if we're talking about $80,000.
80 to 120
Yeah, I mean,
of
you know,
the
look,
county median.
that's
So,
nobody in our city.
I mean, what we're going to go, what we would, tonight, what I've heard from both of you is that you want to see points for projects that are going to produce the project quickly. You want to see consideration for those that don't need other sources of money, okay? And you're looking for projects that target very low and low. I mean, that you want to see more of those types of units. Those are the kind of the three things. Well, and then also you'd mentioned like we should explore cap and trade, and also you know what we
Well,
might
look, if
be
they want to
able
go
do on
extremely low, we won't object to that either.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And, but we would go, what I'd like to do with Judson is to go back and take a look at our criteria and make sure that we have those calibrated the way that you're suggesting that they should.
And then the preference for obviously the on-site being the,
Well, that's, I think that's a
That's an
housing
amendment to the-
opportunity ordinance
Morning.
issue, which is.
We need to
which
make
is-
amendments.
but we
We
need
do.
to introduce that when we discuss these other criteria, because I think that's sort of the,
As part of the presentation.
right, it's part of the discussion
Sure.
here that we're having.
Sure, we can do that, we can do that. But there's some other issues in that HOO that I think require the council's attention, and, but we can certainly include that in the presentation.
And so maybe you can come back to and give us a breakdown. This is just based on RENA, but, you know, what's the need for Santa Ana in regards to extremely low? And, you know, maybe giving us some goals that we can meet, that this is how many we want in the next 3 years. We want, 150. I don't know, if I'm just bringing that number out. That may not be the case. It's something that the whole council has to agree upon. But putting a number, just like, RENA puts a number on very low, moderate, the council is now creating a different, very extremely low. And what does that look like?
You know, I know what you're asking for. I don't have the answer tonight on how we would get there, but we'll go back and put our heads together, and then we'll circle
Need is,
back.
Right.
Great, thank
Happy
you.
to.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you all very much for your hard work.
You're
Good
welcome.
presentation. Next, we're going to be moving toward the Enhanced Infrastructure Finance District. Joe from Cosmont.
Good evening. Thank you, council committee members. My name is Joe Dieguez. I'm with Cosmont Companies. We are for those who don't know, real estate, economic development, public finance advisory firm. Been in business since 1986, a little over 30 years. I myself have been with the firm a little under 8 years now. Among my roles at the firm is head of our tax increment financing district practice group, which encompass EIFDs, CREAs, and similar tools. I've had the pleasure of working with City of Santa Ana on a limited basis through our engagement by SCAG, as SCAG's subject matter expertise as related to these tools, in training and even leading preliminary feasibility analyses for the application of these tools, EIFDs and CREAs, in various SCAG member jurisdictions, including Santa Ana. What I'd like to do in probably about 7 or 8 slides is I want to cover really the basics, the fundamentals behind EIFD and CREA. And then I want to pause, and there's a lot on the agenda tonight, I understand. I think we can go through the rest of the prepared material, which is a case study review of Laverne's EIFD as a case study, or we can switch, if it's the committee's desire, to talking immediately about what this could look like in Santa Ana. So I'll stop right after we go through the basics, if that's all right.
Yes.
Thank you. Our CEO, Larry Cosmont, as a point of levity, the way he tries to translate these new tools is he talks about it as a exercise of Tai Chi. He talks about capturing the momentum from the state policy objectives and shifting it into economic development at the local level. And what that means for these tools is state policy objectives in 2 forms: housing mandates. We've just heard a good presentation of 15-plus housing bills, or a number of them. And we may also be aware of all the sustainability target legislation, AB 32, SB 32, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the ways we view these tools in EIFDs, CREAs, and related tools is translating those policy objectives into actually applicable tools at the local level, translating those into net fiscal impact, revenues, jobs, housing, infrastructure improvements, et cetera, at the local level. So out of that sort of translation of state policy objectives, we find ourselves with somewhat of a toolkit. at the local level, and those comprise of enhanced infrastructure financing districts, EIFDs, community revitalization and investment authorities, CREAs, as we call them. And now, through these the new housing legislation, we end up with some complementary tools. Affordable Housing Authority, actually that was outside of the 15 housing bills. It's a new tax increment financing district with a focus specifically on affordable and workforce housing, AHAs as we call them. And then some of the tools we've discussed in this last session, housing sustainability districts and WHO's workforce housing opportunity zones, each with their own pros and cons and what they can actually do. And in any case, on this last bullet, we also like to think about what are these other tools we always have at our disposal these days in California, cap and trade, part of this last discussion. Other more standardized sources like impact fee revenues, housing in lieu fee revenues, things like that. So we have sort of an updated toolkit for housing and sustainability at the local level. What I'd like to do is talk about sort of the rules of the game, and I'll focus on EIFD as sort of the foremost example and the most widely used to date of these new tax increment financing tools. EIFDs come out of a basis in existing infrastructure financing district laws, IFD law. It's tax increment financing, and I'll discuss that mechanism in a bit more detail in a moment, but for projects of quote-unquote community-wide significance. That's the language in the legislation. So not really project-specific benefit, but community-wide significance. The district lifespan, the duration of the district, is 45 years from the issuance of debt, such as EIFD bonds. The governing board, it's a separate entity called the Public Financing Authority, and it's typically a 5 or more member board where you basically have city council members. If it's a county leading, it's county board members. It could be a combination of those if a city is working together with a county, for example. And in any case, at least 2 members of the public. The guiding document is something called an infrastructure financing plan. And we look at it as sort of a combination of a redevelopment implementation plan and a capital improvement program budget. Sort of CIP meets an RDA implementation plan. So there are components financially related, sort of a business plan with the related fiscal impacts, as well as the policy objectives of the EIFD. There is no public vote to form this district. There is, however, a vote, 55% needed to issue tax increment bonds. There's no school district increment allowed. They're expressly prohibited from participating by the legislation. And to be absolutely clear, when we talk about tax increment financing, we're not talking about an increase in property taxes. It's not an additional assessment above the 1% general levy like CFDs or business improvement districts or property-based improvement districts. Tax increment financing is the redirection of funds from the participating entities, cities, counties, special districts, etc., into the special purpose entity for the purposes eligible. In our case, infrastructure. So what are those eligible expenditures? Focus is clearly on infrastructure, enhanced infrastructure financing districts. Water, sewer, roadway, even libraries, childcare facilities, even parks, open space, high priority on transit infrastructure, remediation, and affordable housing, among others. I want to talk for a moment about what, sorry if this is incredibly obvious, but it's an important foundational comment. When we talk about what property tax increment is, similar to RDA, there is a baseline. In this very illustrative example, there's a baseline of, let's say, $100 million of assessed value in a certain area. There's an increase in property value primarily from 2 ways. Just sort of a standard growth from year to year, which is this sort of this middle section, incremental growth. And then there are larger jumps in value, typically from new development or redevelopment of existing property. When we talk about incremental property tax increment, we're talking about everything above that baseline, both from incremental growth and from new development. Just want to illustrate that concept. So just again, to be clear, nothing about existing revenues, but future potential incremental revenues. I want to spend a minute here. Why why are cities looking at these, or why should cities be looking at tools like EIFD or CREA, tax increment financing tools? Well, in our work, we often take a private sector perspective, and it's a very different message to a developer. Let's say if a city sets up a special purpose entity whose purpose is infrastructure or affordable housing or TOD as a priority, versus perhaps just creating a new line item in the standard general fund budget that says, we're going to do this over the next year or 2 years. The private sector understands segregation of funds and a special purpose entity being set up, and it's a much stronger signal in our experience to the private sector when a special purpose entity like an EIFD is initiated. Number two, when we look at any of these tools, there is, of course, a dedication of, in the case of tax increment financing, property tax revenues from the general fund to a special purpose district. But we only recommend these to our clients when it financially makes sense. So we focus on a return on investment oriented approach. We look at what is the investment in incremental property tax and what is the potential return in terms of net new property tax revenues, sales tax revenues, complementary funding sources, and not related to fiscal revenues, jobs. How does it support our housing goals? How does it support use of our transit-oriented infrastructure, et cetera? So we evaluate these only when it makes sense on a return on investment basis. Number three, other public money. So these districts make most sense when it's more than a single entity driving the process. So the more typical example is a city partnering with a county, let's say within the jurisdiction of a city, on regionally beneficial infrastructure. In the 15 plus that we're working on now, regionally beneficial often means transit-oriented. Sometimes it means regional in terms of roadway infrastructure or regional flood control infrastructure. As Larry likes to say, my boss, when you've seen one EIFD or CREA, you've only seen one. Each one of these is different, and it really depends on the community's priorities. So an investment of the city's funds in an EIFD makes sense when it helps us recruit other people's money from other taxing entities, number three. Another way, number four, if it increases our eligibility for a different type of other people's money, grant sources from state and federal sources. There's a clear higher eligibility for funds like cap and trade, let's say, if it's a cooperative, a multi-jurisdictional, let's say, EIFD pursuing the application versus a single entity, say a city or a county. And the last point is, this is, from the state's perspective, a very clear way for a city to express its sort of desire to kind of comply with the state objectives and use it for local needs. And we only see it to be demonstrated further and further with each new legislative session, which sort of gives us more tools that are very clearly sort of geared toward a specific set of priorities, in our current case, housing and infrastructure. And just one point on governance, we talked about how, from a private sector perspective, setting up a separate entity is a clear signal. Many of our public sector clients see it as a benefit from a public sector agency perspective. A separate governing entity provides what can, in some cases, be a beneficial insulation from day-to-day city operations or political pressures. You make it a priority now, sort of like setting up a retirement funds or a savings account. You're going to stick to this. You're setting up a separate entity, and you're making it a long-term priority that's, in a way, untouchable. Last thing I'll say before I pause is sort of an update on progress. So we have had 3 of these districts successfully formed so far. West Sacramento, I believe, was the first. San Diego's and Otay Mesa, I believe, was the second, and then Laverne's Cosmont client here in LA County, formed at the end of October with a transit-oriented focus, was the most recent. Those are just what are approved so far. Many of these are currently, of course, in evaluation. Cosmont, just within our firm, working on 15 to 20 of these in various stages of approval. Perhaps similar to, as far as this community's size and potential demographics, the city of Riverside, similar population, currently evaluating a CREA with a very high emphasis on affordable housing. Also infrastructure and TOD, but very high emphasis on affordable housing. So they are evaluating a CREA as opposed to an EIFD. So we see momentum gaining. This is where we are currently. What I'd like to do is pause for a second. So I think it may make sense now to talk perhaps about Santa Ana, or we can go through the case study in Laverne based on what you'd like to discuss.
Santa Ana?
Great. So what I'll say about Santa Ana is, again, in our preliminary work with SCAG decided not only to help set up a screening tool to evaluate whether these things make sense in its various member jurisdictions, which is a great online tool. SCAG staff may already be familiar with it. SCAG went a bit further and decided we're going to take the lead on some pilot projects. We're going to get some of these things going because we clearly see the potential for these tools to help implement SCAG's regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. And so one of the pilot projects that SCAG had Cosmont work on was sort of a joint effort between the cities of Santa Ana and Garden Grove. And look at a pretty large area. Within the jurisdiction of Santa Ana, you had sort of the downtown Sardic area. You had the Orange County streetcar route throughout portions of the city. And then a sort of focus area on Willowick Golf Course, where there were interests of both City of Santa Ana and Garden Grove. We presented results of a preliminary analysis. Would you say, Mayor Pro Tem Martinez, what was that, June or July,
Yes.
I believe it was?
Mm-hmm, with City of Garden Grove, yeah.
Right. And we had some helpful feedback from that call. It ended up being a call where we went through the presentation. And in that example, we saw, at least with the collaboration of Santa Ana and Garden Grove, analysis really honing in on the Willowick area as far as how could one of these tools, like an EIFD, be used then. We're now at the point where we think, and in SCAG's opinion, we'd like to take it to the next level. And honestly, I think it's honestly just at a logistical stage of how we can get together, have another one of these collaborative group meetings, ideally a meeting, if not just a conference calls, and take that to the next stage. The idea being take advantage of an area where there's a huge development or huge potential for redevelopment or new development and capture a portion of new growth and to redirect it for the purposes of infrastructure, affordable housing, whatever might be the policy objectives of the group. So one of our suggestions this is subject to the group's and also SCAG's discretion, is to take that preliminary analysis to a next stage, reevaluating, honing in on that initial boundary that was evaluated, making sure it's focused on the areas that both communities think are most perhaps the lowest hanging fruit, to phrase it a certain way, and take it to the next stage, so to speak. And our last conversation with SCAG reflected agreement with that. I think some helpful direction from this group would be, what are your higher priority areas? What should we and SCAG be focusing on? Do we want to pursue certain geographies, perhaps separately from Garden Grove, where perhaps they don't have a vested interest, and perhaps separately evaluate Willowick or similar areas? That's the kind of information that would be helpful to us. We'll obviously report back to SCAG. That's just a suggestion. Certainly available to answer any questions or help the discussion move along further.
Great, thank you. One question, I think when we did meet with Garden Grove initially, and SCAG provided the presentation along with Cosmont, was that the Garden Grove really saw it more as a benefit for Santa Ana versus themselves. And so I'm not sure, based on that kind of conversation, if Garden Grove would be willing to take the next step forward, since Santa Ana probably would capture most of the benefit. And so I definitely understand that. And so I think we've been looking at possibly, is there other potential doing an EIFD within the streetcar between Sartec and, up to of course, the Willowick Golf Course, possibly not including Garden Grove if they so choose not to want to participate. The other is also, you heard our conversation, affordable housing is something really big, but along that streetcar, we want to make sure that, as people may be displaced, and there's been talks about gentrification and displacement, that, we set policies that and find funding mechanisms to make sure that we continue to have, those residents that are living within that corridor still have the ability to live there. I think that's very important for me. I'm assuming for the rest of the council as well. And so I think affordable housing is something that is important. I'm not sure if it makes sense to do an EFID or a CREA, as you call it. And so again, with the CREA, you can use I think you can use cap and trade funds for both, right? And so just the CREA is that you need to have 25% set aside. Correct, for low-income affordable housing.
Correct.
I think that's just the difference, and so it's a discussion that the council should have. One, because of the streetcar and the opportunity that we have to capture some of that revenue, and then two, our commitment to affordable housing and making sure that we don't continue to displace people as we have here in the past within major corridor areas and projects. And so I'll just pass it on to Councilman Sarmiento, but those are my points at this time.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I think, Mr. City Manager, you had a comment. I saw you reaching for your. Did you?
It was more for of a question. I saw that the projects are must have a citywide benefit, but is the district also citywide, or is it a focused area?
Good question. So the language used in the legislation is community-wide significance, somewhat vague term, and to directly answer the second question, no, by no means do the districts have to be coterminous with city limits. But to be clear what their use of community-wide seems to represent, it's really more of a not just project-specific translation. So, for example, they give you this long list, including but not limited to, and then they list all of these infrastructure improvements types listed on here, plus more. It goes on, and then they say, any structure with a useful life of 15 years or more, and they just list these as examples. So it's kind of a broad definition of infrastructure and eligibility. But what they also make a point of saying is, let's say you have some, water treatment center, for example, that's located in one corner of the city, and you've got some properties and potential new development in a different area that would clearly benefit from that water treatment facility. The legislation makes it very clear that the district can fund improvements to this water treatment facility, even if it's outside the boundaries of the district. So the shaping of the district is really more about capturing the areas of growth, redevelopment, and new development, and focusing on paying for infrastructure and similar improvements that benefit that area without a very strict nexus requirement or anything like that, and certainly not the requirement that the boundaries of the district are coterminous with the city boundaries. But I will say this, what we did see come out in September, October, were some additional, you've maybe heard the term NIFTY, Neighborhood Infill Transportation. Someone could help me, it's too many of these acronyms. But one of the sort of nuances of this new legislation is you can now contribute incremental sales tax in addition to property tax to an EIFD. And there are a few, but one of the sort of strings that come along with that is because it's sales tax, you do actually then have to define the boundaries of the district coterminous with the city limit due to the way sales tax is allocated, quite frankly. That's the only case where it's a requirement that the district must be coterminous with city limits if you'd like to dedicate incremental sales tax into the special purpose entity.
Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate the presentation. I think it was helpful, and I think having presented to SCAG, there's some obvious benefit there. I think for us, there's a lot of different ideas or areas that I think could benefit from something like this, and I think Willowick comes to mind. I just think it's a little clumsier when you have two agencies that have 14 members on it trying to figure things out. And I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, one city or one agency may feel like the other agency is getting a better deal out of this. What I was trying to figure out is when you're talking about the district and the relationship maybe to some other area that would benefit from it, from those proceeds in the community, right? So let's just say, when you talk about the civic infrastructure, we have a civic center that we share with, with the county to some degree. It's sort of I'm not sure if it's a JPA. But it's a very dormant site, right? It's a lot of land, very underperforming, has issues now with homelessness. If there was some nexus between the district, the proceeds from, something like an EIFD in a certain district to benefit that, or some connection to where we could use some of those proceeds there, just because we realize that, there's a lot that can be done with it, and we're trying to be creative on how we can find a way to maybe address that as an asset that we see is there, and not only is underperforming, but has a lot of ills right now having to do with homeless encampment.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's where I got lost a little bit on the nexus and the relationship between the district and maybe an area in the community that would benefit.
So I would say something like a civic center improvement, like I believe what you just outlined, is a very good example of what was in mind in the legislation being drafted and focusing on regional and community-wide benefit. And I say it for a number of reasons. One of them is because there are likely clearly more than one jurisdiction benefiting. I mean, clearly it's sort of an HQ for all of the city, so very community-wide beneficial from that perspective. But also because it's shared with the county, I think the county would potentially, you'd know more than I, obviously, but the county would also realize some benefit if it somehow improves their operations or something like that. And it may be the case that this is an example where it would make sense for multiple jurisdictions, namely the city and the county, to partner, if that were the desire of the city, to not only dedicate some of the city's own property tax incremental revenues, but also the county's, if the case could be made to the county that it made sense for them. I would say that's one way where I think it's a good candidate for one of these. The second way is because I would only assume that it is under public ownership. If there is some portion of the property that does end up either getting partitioned and reused and perhaps ending up in a private revenue-generating use, it could represent the placing on the tax rolls of a significant amount of value, generating a significant amount of incremental property tax, whereas as a publicly owned asset, it would generate zero property tax. So I could see, for two reasons, both multi-jurisdictional benefit and, quite frankly, a huge boom in incremental property tax becoming available. I think that example's pretty good candidate as a good way to use one of these things.
Well, to your former point, right before you came in and before we started the meeting, we were talking about how we could sue the county because they're not doing enough for the homelessness issue. So that one's probably more remote.
Got it.
Because the relationship isn't as strong as we'd like it to be. But look, that doesn't mean we can't agree on other things.
Right.
So, but I do think that there is, again, not only a civic benefit, but there is a regional benefit. There is a shared
Absolutely.
benefit for not just the county, but for other cities, because this is it's a county seat. So we have other communities that come into the area. Again, trying to figure out how we can make some improvements, bring some assets here. That's sort of the quandary, right?
Great. So I'm hearing definitely a downtown sort of civic center potential component, definitely a streetcar kind of corridor component. I think both of those make sense. And Skag's not here tonight, but I'm sure as soon as you mention anything transit corridor related, they'd be all for continuing to assist the city sort of on their dime with pushing the analysis forward, sort of refocusing the boundaries. Are there any other areas perhaps or specific projects
Main Street.
that may be of priority?
Yes, South Main Street as well, South Main Street corridor. And also First Street.
South Main, because there's a portion of the city that has its own funding source from a lawsuit that was filed years ago, and I think community development may know that a little bit more than we do. I forget. I think at one point it was, I don't know what the amount is.
Close to 6 million, I think.
Close to about 6 million, right, from the Peebler lawsuit. So, there's money there already. If it can be augmented, I guess is always a benefit.
Okay.
We believe it's about 4 million plus, actually.
Big gap between
Big
4 and
4.6.
Huh?
That's about approximately,
Yeah.
as of June 30th.
So those are the areas
Or
that,
spend it before it turns into 2
yeah,
million.
2 million,
So-
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So those are three opportunity
Excellent.
areas.
So at the very least, certainly take any more questions, of course, but at the very least, I think what we can do, at least internally at Cosmont, Larry Cosmont, myself, and our friends at SCAG, would be share with them the feedback that we heard tonight and talk about reshaping the analysis. And SCAG obviously loves the idea of city of Santa Ana, Garden Grove partnerships, but SCAG's very realistic about focusing on things that are actually implementable and political realities and things like that. So I wouldn't expect any issue with sort of refocusing, and maybe there ends up being a different pilot project to the benefit of Garden Grove. That will be SCAG's decision. But I'd be very happy to share with them what we heard tonight.
Great, thank you.
You got it.
Fantastic. Update on the rent stabilization, Judson, quick update on that.
Yes, thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem Martinez. In respect to my colleagues, so we are proposing tonight an outline of a rent stabilization measures work study session. This is a work study session that was requested by City Council. As part of this outline, if approved to move forward by the committee, we would have four parts to this work study session. The first would be an introduction by staff to give an overview of our current housing stock and affordability in Santa Ana. This would be by both either our planning staff or our community development staff. Second would be an academic perspective of rent control, rent stabilization policies. An overview by Professor Richard Green, the Lusk Chair in Real Estate at USC Price School. He's already been confirmed if the committee decides to move forward for February 6th as a work study session. The third component would be an administrative perspective, from an administrative review of the administration, staffing, and resources to manage a rent control policy. And this would be presented by Tracy Condon, who's the executive director of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. And then the fourth would be alternative tools other than rent control that local cities and jurisdictions can consider to increase and maintain housing affordability. And we haven't confirmed anybody yet for this part of the presentation, and if we're not able to, then we would likely present the tools ourselves as staff. But with that, this is an outline for consideration by the committee as to whether or not you'd like to move forward with bringing this forward to the full City Council for consideration.
Looks good to me. Anything else you want to add, Councilman Sarmiento? I think it's well-rounded.
No, I think it is, and thank you for preparing this and getting it ready for the full council to consider. Just a couple of things that we may want to mention. I think it's probably part of the larger framework, but to the extent that this is not exclusively rent control, but also, I'm trying to
Just cause.
Just cause.
Eviction.
Just
Right.
cause eviction.
So, sort of a tenants' rights issue
Yeah.
as well. We probably have some language in the code that already assists tenants and renters. And as we know, our community is just, we have many, many renters and tenants. So to the extent that we get a review of what we have already in our toolkit with respect to assisting tenants and renters and making sure that their rights are being protected, and talking about how we can maybe do better enforcement or enhance those rules that are already on the books, right? So something short of rent control as well. Obviously, we're going to talk about rent control, but again, other options that we may have to achieve the same goal, which is to make sure that tenants and renters are treated fairly, equitably, and we know that with spiking rents, we see a lot of displacement. We're all talking about addressing that problem. So, rent control is one of the options, but it's not the only one. So, just so we can have a more
Robust
thorough
conversation.
discussion about all our alternatives, and again, we're familiar with what Santa Monica, what Berkeley has done. But, would it fit here in our community? I think it's a good discussion to have, but we also have to have, short of that, what might help.
What are we doing now? What can we do to enhance that? And then what are some other tools? Right?
Exactly. Yep.
And I think that's this
Yep.
item, this item 4, where we're still trying to zero in on a presenter. So. Thank you.
Zach, thank you so very much. Next, we're going to be moving towards, in all, Francisco, you could do all three. It's the unfunded liability, the comprehensive annual financial report, and then review of debt management policy.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This is Francisco Gutierrez, Finance and Management Services. We're going to do a three-prong approach here. First, I know that's always my task. So first, I'm going to present Nitin Patel, who's the partner at White, Nelson, Dale Evans. They are our current city auditors. He's going to do a brief overview in terms of the functionality that his firm did and some of the elements. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sergio Vidal, who's my assistant finance director, who will go over, who will also provide an overview on elements within on the financial report, as well as the unfunded liability. And then I'll take it over in reviewing the debt management policy. So with that, I'm going to present Nitin.
Okay, I'm going to get started. Make this a little short, or
Yes.
just go through my comments.
Yes, thank
So,
you.
Again, the outline, I wanted to cover the scope of services, management responsibilities, the auditor's responsibilities, the opinion and reports, and finally communicate certain information to you. The scope of our services included doing the audit for the CAFR, which is a city audit, an AQMD audit, again, limit review. We also review the city's investment policy. We're currently in the process of doing your audit of federal grants. We're preparing the state controller's report. And finally, we have to certify the Section 8 voucher financial data schedule. Management is responsible for preparing the accurate financial statements, also maintaining internal control and adopting sound accounting policies. Our responsibility is to express an opinion on the financial statements, review management's assertions, conduct a risk assessment, examine information presented in the financial statements, and also assess the accounting principles used and estimates in the financial statements. And then next, our auditor's opinion. We issued a clean audited opinion. In other words, the financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. In the management letter, we did not identify any material weaknesses. We did not have any significant deficiencies to report. We did report another matter related to how do we account for construction in progress. Let me just skip that one. And finally, the communications. There are certain estimates in your financial statements which are reported there, which includes the fair value of investments, value of capital assets for infrastructure assets, the required contributions and the estimates for the pension liabilities, also the OPEB liabilities and claims payable liabilities. We did not have any significant adjustments that we made. We also requested that management give us representations that they provide us with information related to the audit. We're not aware that the city consulted with any other CPA firms related to how to report any accounting or auditing matters. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you so very much. Appreciate it. We just received this, so I have yet to be able to review it, but I'll have some fun in the next couple days reading it.
And I'll be glad to answer any questions, and if you want me to come back to meet with you, I'll be glad to do that.
You have any questions for him, Councilman Sarmiento?
Go ahead, you were going to say something?
No, I was going to say Sergio's going to now
No, okay, I don't have any.
go a little bit deeper into the financial statement, not too much.
Let's have
just-
you all finish, and then maybe we'll have
Okay.
questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Once again, Sergio Vidal, Assistant Finance Director here with the city. Pleased to report to you the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, commonly known as the CAFR, for June 30th, 2017. As we gear up for our budget process for fiscal year 17-18, we're actually going back here, back to June 30th, 2017, so there may be a little, just to clarify that first point there. Real quick, we're just going to go through and touch on a little bit of what Mr. Patel has mentioned. Thank you very much to Mr. Patel and his firm for conducting the CAF for this fiscal year. But we're going to go in a little deeper into the audit results, financial statement results that are presented in the CAFR, and we'll also address or discuss pension and OPEB liabilities, or the city's strategies for them. Once again, the audit result, the CAFR was completed on December 12, 2017, and there was no significant findings or material deficiencies within their internal control. So it's positive, once again, for the fiscal year for the city. However, there was a management letter comment regarding the construction in progress and how to account for that, and we're working with the departments to go ahead and rectifying that matter. Also, just want to let you know, as Ms. Mayor Pro Tem indicated, the CAFR is on our website. And additionally, over 10 years of websites as far back as 2006, just in accordance with our Sunshine Ordinance and transparency going forward approach. Here, the government-wide statement, I think, from a lot of perspectives, and just real quick here on a very summary level, typically you see the general fund as the main component in presentations related to financial information in the city. The government-wide statements is a more comprehensive that includes the governmental activities, which includes the general fund. Also, police grants, housing, those are the main drivers within the governmental activities. But this statement also includes the business type activities, which are commonly referred to as our enterprise activities, such as the water fund, the parking fund, and we'll go in detail as well. I'm happy to report the city's net position overall is a positive $778 million. And it did experience a positive ending operating balance of $22 million for fiscal year June 30 of 17. In relation to just a little deeper on the government-wide statements in millions, obviously, as indicated, we do have a positive net position of $778 million. However, we do have $784 million in liabilities for the city. A majority of that includes the city's net pension liability, which is approximately $570 million. So we'll go through that in a later slide, just to kind of a little more detail on what that is, and also its post-employment benefits liability. But mainly, as noted above, capital assets obviously is a huge component of the city's net position, along with its cash investments overall citywide. And again, just want to reiterate, this includes both the governmental and business type activities for the city. Now, governmental funds, little deep dive here. This includes the general fund, but also includes those other funds that I mentioned, such as the housing, capital projects, and any police grants or other grants as well. The fund balance as of June 30th was $226 million, and more importantly, the change in fund balance was a deficit of approximately $1.1 million. So we are seeing some contraction. The main driver for that obviously was a decrease in the general fund last year as of June 30th, 2017, and approximately $2.4 million. And we'll go in a little short in a slide upcoming that we'll discuss in the general fund. But also there have been some capital projects that have received related to grant revenue, so also a driver as well. Now, the general fund, as of June 30th, so as of past fiscal year, its ending fund balance was $74 million. However, the maintained and operating loss is at $2.4 million. You may recall during some budget study sessions, $400,000 or $0.4 million was the actual deficit for the chief operating fund for the city. However, for CAFR purposes, we do include other funds such as the council-approved plan, the strategic plan, the POW program as a quote-unquote general fund for CAFR purposes. So that's why you see the variance or the difference for the total change in $2.4 million as of June 30th deficit. Again, as commonly noted as well, the city's revenues are experiencing an increase. However, there has been some overall increase as the committee members are aware of the reduction in jail revenue, an increase in expenses regarding graffiti, and also a reduction in the water transfer. And here, in relation to the general fund, as noted earlier, $74.5 million is the fund balance for the city, and that also includes the city's operating reserve, $42.4, and the economic uncertainty at $3.8 million, along with this pension stability of $500,000 or $0.5 million as well. Now, the enterprise funds, now we could segue away from the general fund, the enterprise funds, and if I could just skip to the slide, those include the water fund, the parking fund, the refuse fund, the transportation, the SARTAC fund. The ending fund balance or the net position is 146 million. So what does that really mean? It means it's continuing. It's healthy. This change in net position or its ending operating balance for last fiscal year, June 30th, 17, was 8.2 million. So its majority of the funds are experiencing a positive operating balance. Obviously, there are some challenges, but staff continues to monitor them. But this is the positive end result for the enterprise fund. However, the internal service funds, its overall net position, and if I could just jump to this slide real quick, the internal service funds for the city includes the liability fund, which is your where you pay claims, so forth, the workers' compensation, the information and communication fund, the IT fund, the building maintenance, central services, and fleet. Its overall position as of June 30th is approximately $8 million deficit. So there is a... Yeah.
That's very problematic.
It's staff is monitoring, and we're well aware of the.
There are a couple of key elements in terms of why the net position kind of flips in some of these funds. Part of it is because we now have to report, obviously, the pension liabilities on the balance sheets, which just came in a couple years ago. That's one element of it that actually is impacting this. And in this case, in return for the overall internal service funds, one of the biggest issues that we have is our workers' comp claims. Obviously, when we outsourced the fire department, we kept the claims in-house. There was no revenue coming in because the fire department was no longer here. So the employees weren't paying into it, but the city had to absorb the claims. So that's one big element, obviously, that's impacting the workers' comp component. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with because, like I indicated, there are no fire employees to pay into the workers' comp position.
And just to piggyback as what Mr. Gutierrez mentioned, and the overall drag on these internal service funds are the liability and workers' comp funds. So, we'll be addressing it in upcoming presentations. And now the net pension liability, as indicated, is $570 million, or 569.9. You may have seen on another slide it was about 571. That's another supplemental pension that that the city has entered into with some few safety employees. But this is the CalPERS liability here, $570 million, the net pension liability. So its funding status for safety is 69.1 and miscellaneous 68.5. And the reason I bring those up is prior year for miscellaneous it was about 72 and safety about 74. So you could see now the decrease. Now the decrease is largely attributable to the investment returns by CalPERS. Obviously, the city or the finance department is not in charge of those assets. However, that is the setup that CalPERS has with the city and obviously other jurisdictions. Strategies, obviously, we're talking about a huge number here, but funding a pension stability reserve on an annual basis. And we are working, and as you're aware, we have contributed $500,000 back in December 2015, but we haven't contributed anything since. So we do have an amount, $500,000. We're also, staff is currently evaluating pre-funding the city's contribution or payment to CalPERS in the fiscal year 18-19 for the safety component, just to provide some general fund relief. It's about $19 million. So we're evaluating if the city's ability to make a one-time lump sum payment rather than making it over 24 payments during the fiscal year. And now the OPEB, the other post-employment benefits liability section, it's smaller. It's approximately $40 million. It's gone up slightly from previous fiscal year. As you're aware, the city has entered into a PEMCA plan with its retirees, and obviously some strategies more manageable, $40 million versus the $570. However, obviously we could set up an OPEB trust or pre-fund any of its obligations for the city. The city has already established with PARS or Public Agency Retirement Services for the pension stability. So it is definitely a possibility and a potential to establish a OPEB trust fund as well. Also, the city could make its annual required contribution. Currently, as of June 30th, it was about $2.5 million, so the city could enter into that engagement. Another strategy is out there is, we all aware of all jurisdictions are handling these matters, is increasing maybe employee contribution rates or eliminating benefits altogether. This concludes my portion of the presentation. We're available for any questions or comments. Thank you.
I think you're going to end, Fran. So after Fran's presentation, if we have any questions.
Sure. I'll make this brief. Back in 2017, there was an SB 1029 that requires each city now to formally adopt a debt policy. So at that time, we evaluated whether or not we were going to issue debt to determine how quickly we needed to put this together. So there was no public issuance of debt that was really in the forecast for the city of Santa Ana. So we kind of took our time in developing this only because we wanted to draw in some of the guidelines or directives from not only CDAC but from the GFOA as well, and looked at their guidelines, and then look at other cities in terms of what they had put together as debt policy. So, do you guys have? Can you put this? Yeah, sure. So again, we've moved forward, in response to SB 29 and trying to put a draft policy together. The intent here is for a review by both the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Sarmiento to see if there's any feedback. We have provided the draft policy to the EMT for their review and feedback as well. But in this draft policy, we went beyond what SB 1029 was requiring from public issuance debt to also capture privately placed debt. Okay. So again, what we did was, in terms of the guidelines, we went out, we pulled together the California Debt Investment Advisor Commission, known as CDAC, as well as the Government Finance Officers Association. We pulled those together. We looked at the industry standards from MSRB, as well as the rating agencies. And then we kind of looked at some of the cities that were highlighted in some of these guidelines and looked at their debt policies, and we tried to pull from each one of those. So what are in essence, in regards to the overview, in terms of the City Santa Ana debt policy objectives, we obviously wanted to ensure that all debt issuance is in alignment with the city's strategic plan as well as the city's CIP. We also tried to make sure that we determine the appropriate use of the debt proceeds and the purpose of the debt, establish those parameters, and then identifying financing options and types of debt that may be issued. One of obviously the primary things that we were interested in is in ensure that there's cost-effective borrowing by minimizing debt service and issuance costs. Ensure compliance with obviously applicable state and federal laws, and ensure fully and timely repayment of debt service and complete financial disclosure and reporting of debt. So as you review the debt policy, some of the elements you will find is we will identify a list of permissible financing options. So we will identify debt limits, and then you will notice some of the financing options that we would include, as well as the debt that may be publicly issued or privately placed. So in terms of the debt structure, we want to make sure all capital project finance through the issue will be financed for a period not to exceed the useful life of the project. Obviously, that's important. We want to make sure that we structure a fair allocation of cost to current and future beneficiaries of the finance capital project. And we look at fixed interest rate debt service versus variable interest rate debt service. We kind of are lean more toward the fixed interest because it's predictable for the most part. But that doesn't preclude us looking at the variable component. And then the debt issuance, how we pick providers, what kind of bond sale methods are we going to utilize, and then the framework in terms of refunding publicly issued debt. And then as far as debt management, finance actually usually reviews the coordination of all activities related to the issuance and administration of debt. And we actually outlined the records retention policy. So that kind of briefly outlines, but what I'm really looking for is feedback. We would hope to take this before the City Council sometime in February for formal adoption. And the reason we kind of want to do it fairly early is because there's this, I think there's this built-up pressure in terms of probably issuing debt in this calendar year, potentially. So we just want to make sure that before we do that, we adopt this.
I can't make any comments now because this was just provided it to us today, and so I'll review it and Councilman Sarmiento review it, maybe provide some comment. But at the same time, if we can, before you rescind, so if you can send us the information of where EMT was at, if they had any changes or adjustments, you can share that with us as well, and then we could provide you with our comments.
Oh, yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. And yes, whenever you have feedback, we'll take those in and then look to either incorporate those changes.
Okay, and then
into
you
that
just bring it forward to the council. And then on my comment as it pertains to the CAFR, obviously, it's in the rears. It's not prospective. Definitely, there are some changes to our financial situation this fiscal year coming. I would just say that, as we look at our liabilities, not only our pensions, but, our other legacy costs in regards to, our unfunded infrastructure and on and so forth, you look at that number just in regards to pensions unfunded liability, it's over $600 million, right? Obviously, we're not generating enough revenue, now or into the future until we look at other mechanisms to really say that this city is solvent. Definitely, we have to, by the state of California and your guys' whatever it's called, we got to have a balanced budget. Obviously, though, when you look at our liabilities, the city's not solvent; it's insolvent. When you add that up and just wanting to have that honest conversation, I think I've always been honest with you guys. And again, I'll review the CAFR, but again, that is in the rears. It's not prospective, and definitely as we move forward with moving towards a new budget cycle. We have to take a closer look, and I will be adding some comments in my member comments and some of the things as we move forward towards our mid-year budget review of some of the things that I would like to see. But other than that, those are my brief comments. I got to review everything before I provide more input.
Yeah, I think the value of our comments will probably not be as helpful right now, not having looked at it a little bit more. But I guess if you can maybe just summarize, Francisco, where we are relative to other cities and their unfunded liabilities and their exposure. So I guess, we see this through a different lens, right? If we look at it just through the lens of the numbers, it looks like there's overexposure. There's, there's danger. Do other cities, do other, agencies operate with this kind of liability?
The answer is yes. Obviously, all cities are going through this. In fact, we do monitor. We've looked at other cities in order to determine where we fit in the spectrum. Are we too high? Are we too? Are we in the better position? And believe it or not, we're actually in the middle. So we're not. We're not one of those cities that have extremely high liabilities in comparison to our numbers, but we're also not on the low end. We're actually kind of coming out in the middle. So we're part of the group as we move forward in dealing with our liabilities.
And if I may add, just give perspective on that, I would venture here that we're not at the top because at our staffing levels, we are very lean. When you look at staffing levels for some cities, the ratio of employees or constituents to employees, you're in the neighborhood of 65, 78. In that neighborhood, we have 228 constituents per employee. So we're a much leaner organization than most. And I think that is probably one of the reasons our liability is sort of mid-range when we look at other cities. But to the Mayor Pro Tem's statement, I think all cities are wrestling with a deficit of service level. And that's what's not captured in the CAFR. It's a financial statement, but there's a deficit of service level for most of the cities that they're grappling with as I speak to my peers.
Right, and not to say, well, let's have some comfort in knowing we have good company. We're all, in a dangerous position, but it gives us some perspective as to what we can do. And I'm glad. One of the things I'm hoping to see is better practices that you're talking about from some of these other communities that have improved their situation. And I know with us, sometimes these pensions, depending on the health of those investments, it really does change, how the liability we have. So,
the major concern, obviously, moving forward, we're going to see increasing pension costs. That's a given. So over the years, our pension costs will continue to grow, and we're going to have to grapple with that. The biggest element, obviously, the unknown is PERS itself. Again, 70% of their revenue is generated from investments. Only 30% comes from the actual, revenue driven by cities and by cities to PERS. But the element of how they deal with the discount rate, which is an inverse relationship with our liabilities. Mm-hmm. The lower they come with their discount rate, the higher are going to be our unfunded liabilities. And that we can't control, because if they lower it another 0.25%, our liabilities could jump maybe another 50 million, if you will. So we need to be cautious and remember that as we move forward in trying to deal with this problem. We have to do something.
Great. Thank you guys for your comments. Next, we're going to be moving towards very quickly. Nabil, if we could please have the update on the purchase of the real property. I know you've been waiting patiently.
Good evening. I will be brief. We have been in a pursuit for a land for a water well for years now, but we just found a site for us that is ideal for a water well, and we just wanted to give you an update on that purchase. We will come to you for an agreement to purchase the site. It's ideal for a water well site. It's again, a water well is needed per our master plans. We have a few wells that are aging. Most of our wells were built in the 60s, and few in the 80s, and few in the 90s, but we are in need to replace few wells now, and so it will add to our redundancy of the water system. And Orange County Water District is pushing their producers to pump more water out of the groundwater basin above and beyond the 75% normal production expectation. This is the site that we found. It is located in a near a low pressure area in the system just south of the I-5. Building a well there will enhance the pressure and the service level in that area. It's close to the elevated tank. It is near a high capacity infrastructure like water lines and storm drain and power lines. It is an industrial area or industrial area, and it is a vacant land, and we have a willing seller for that site. And the size of it is about 26,000 square feet, ideal for us. And this is basically another plan of the site. This is the site. That's the elevated tank. These contour lines are the pressure zone lines. As you can see, it's 45 psi going to 50. Once we drill the well, we will enhance that pressure, maybe bring it to about 65, 62 psi. Will again improve the service level, and I open it for questions.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you, Nabil. Appreciate it. Next, we're going to do just very quick, brief updates, and then we're going to conclude this meeting. Is the ordinance on the small business worker cooperative. Rob?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. We are working on a draft small business ordinance which incorporates encouragement of worker cooperatives with the city attorney's office, and we'll have that before the council later in this year.
When later this year? Do you guys have a time frame?
I think we're going to present the draft ordinance at the next EDBIT meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be March.
March. Okay, great. Downtown skate park, Mark?
The city manager and staff met last week to internally discuss the construction of a privately funded skate park in the alley behind the 5th and French parking garage. We'll be meeting with the Chase family in the upcoming week to discuss the feasibility of this.
Fantastic. Questions, Councilman Sarmiento, on that? Great. Next is the fiber optic network plan. Jack?
Yes, we put out, Public Works Agency put out an RFP at the end of last year. We're working with the IT department and Public Works are working together on this. We selected a vendor. We just met last week to refine the scope of the project because it does involve the street lights now and the small cell sites, because every small cell has a fiber component to it. So we want to incorporate both together to make sure that the city takes advantage of any opportunities with small cells to aid us in our fiber master plan. So the Public Works is going back and negotiating with the vendor all of the scope elements that we decided on, and we're hoping to find funding and come to council in February with this.
Great, thank you. Just very quickly, I just make mention, I was at a California League of Cities Latino caucus retreat, and we had one of our sponsors who does deal with purchase of lights, and they're looking at doing some pilot projects that are ready to go for financing and helping move forward. So I'll give them your guys' information and name, because we were talking about, my colleagues were teasing me because I kept talking about dark fiber, and I don't think they understood what dark fiber is. I'm like, it's a private network, and obviously they didn't know what it meant, but they just like, is this the dark web? What are you talking about, dark fiber? We don't understand. And I'm like, look, man, Google it. But dark fiber, in a nutshell, it's a private network where if municipalities are going to be going towards a fiber network, you need to go to dark fiber because of the security and privacy is an option that we need to consider. But more importantly, Jack, I would just ask, because I know that some folks, amusement park and others, have met with various council members as it pertains to what are we going to be doing for fiber. And I know they recently met with the city manager, and we want to get back to them. I don't know if they can present here at the next meeting, but I know they've been doing their circles with council members and kind of out in the limbo and wanting to know, are we going to figure out a way to partner with them? If not, when do we have that conversation? And so I just want to make sure, and that's the reason why I asked not only for update of the plan, but as well that they have met with various council members and recently our city manager, and just want to make sure we have some next steps.
Mayor Pro Tem, just to give you a brief explanation, the amusement park gave a presentation of the projects that are depending on fiber optics. I think it was last year, and as we have told them consistently, that once we have our master plan established, and then we come and share with them and then see how we can all participate as a private-public partnership to be able to do what we want to do, and also help them do their project as well, and combine it also with street light, LEDs, a small cell. All of those components are going to play a role in setting up our fiber optic enterprise program.
So the ball's in our court.
Excuse me?
Is the ball in our court?
Yes, it is.
Yes, so I just hopefully we relayed that message to them. I know they asked, I had informed them that we were doing an RFP in regards to the fiber network, and so I'm just hope that they understand that we got to wait for this to come out before we enter into a partnership, Mr. City Manager.
No, that's a very good point. We should probably draft a letter and give them a response and let them know where we're at. But at this point, we're just not ready to entertain. And I know their proposal entails using our credit, basically accessing public financing through us. At this point, we're just not ready to scope a project. But in terms of this consultant, there are several things that the consultant's going to be doing for us. One of them is a master plan. But the direction I've given to our Chief Innovation Technology Officer is that I wanted to prioritize the small cell sites, coming up with the criteria for that, because that particular area is getting threatened with legislation proposed at the state, now at the federal level. And if we can secure an agreement with the small cell companies, we can lock in an agreement that will then not be affected by any subsequent legislation that eliminates our opportunity to partner with them and set up a franchise fee and all of that. So we want to make sure that we lock that in before we're not able to.
This is backbone infrastructure for the city as it pertains to technology, looking at possible an EFID as well, and financing. So let's be creative, looking at cap and trade. I've been talking to legislators saying that, look, as we move forward into the 21st century and needing this backbone infrastructure, a lot of cities are unable to pay for that, right? And the time period it's going to take to actually put that in. And so I'm trying to figure out how do they put legislation in or grant funding to help assist. But they did go back to me. They're like, look, you have the opportunity through an EFID to make that happen. So have your staff look at that. So something for us to consider as well.
Yeah, I think City of Santa Ana has a really good chance of getting grants for the mere reason of its density, and also lack of accessibility of good portion of the population to internet.
Correct,
So,
exactly.
you know, the digital divide would make us qualified for all kinds of state and federal help.
Fantastic. So next to staff comments, bro.
And Mayor Pro Tem, I was just going to add, do not stop lobbying for grants, because EFIDs, as great as they are, they
takes
will
time.
basically take a certain portion of our future sales tax growth, or, I'm sorry, property tax growth, and divert it away from the general fund, which we desperately need. So we still prefer grants.
Great. Any more comments on staff comments? Any more staff comments? No. Committee member comments?
I think it's all been said.
Fantastic. On the next agenda, I would just like to, again, focus on infrastructures. We're talking about housing. I made mention at the last council meeting and trying to figure out, you know, as we move forward towards policy, and had the opportunity to also speak to the executive director of the League of Cities, and we're looking at making housing a priority for Latinos throughout the state. And of course, the league just made that another priority as well. But, you know, the reason why cities haven't built the housing that they've said is not just because, you know, redevelopment went away, but obviously it sometimes doesn't pencil out for cities as well because of the infrastructure costs to maintain the resources for police and fire and you name it, code enforcement. A lot of that is not factored into building the housing, maintaining the housing, and so it's not very lucrative for a city to wanting to, you know, build housing, and that's what she said. She says no one's really having that honest conversation, and so just wanting to make sure that we continue to have that conversation as we grow, and we're because we are going to have some issues as it pertains down the road of how do we maintain all this infrastructure, and are we going to have the manpower to sustain, you know, those residents in those areas where we're bringing in new residents, and that's something that we need to take into account. And then finally, you know, and I've spoken to our city manager as it pertains to earthquake preparedness and seismic retrofitting, in particular our city hall. I think you all have heard me speak about that. And being honest, and how that's not, you know, City Hall is, you know, it's not reinforced, and there are issues there, and we need to address. And I'm glad that our city manager is a civil engineer to understand that, you know, there is liability, and we got to have an honest conversation about that as we move forward. You know, Santa Monica, Riverside, and recently I just saw SCAG just post that Malibu just hired Lucy Jones as it pertains to help them moving forward with seismic retrofits within various buildings, not only at City Hall, but as well in the private industry, trying to figure out a program as we move forward. It's not if, it's when. You know, Northern California just had a 4.5 earthquake, and you probably saw the media. You know, what are we going to do? You know, and again, it's not about loss of life for us. It's really from an economic development perspective that, you know, are we going to be able to be sustained after the disaster? Because there is very little loss of life. It's, you know, when, you know, you have infrastructure collapsing, you know, major large employers can leave because we can't repair. And so specifically for us, our own City Hall, that is problematic. And so wanting to figure out how do we agendize that and what next steps that we do take. And as we move forward finally with our mid-year budget review and making sure that we're able to paint a narrative of what our really financial issues are and being honest with that, and putting a plan together where it's presented not only to the city council, but there's buy-in from our staff and buy-in from the community. I think it's going to be important as we move forward, and in particular after these 12 months, you know, you are going to have a possibly new city council, and you know, it's important that we have a plan to help those new council members that come in understand the position that we're in and some of the tough decisions they may have to make.
Absolutely, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to add that since this committee last met, of course, I became aware of the City Hall situation. I just gave direction last week to our Director of Public Works to lead a team, because he's not responsible for facilities, but I'm asking him to take a lead of a team that will have facilities managers from FMA and our building official from PBA, and begin to scope and also speak to firms to get a proposal. What I'd like to do is put out an RFP to get engineers in here and assess this building. But I need to know roughly what that's going to cost me just to do the initial assessment, to really study this and give me an order of magnitude from a budgetary point of view. So then we can bring this to council and say, look, it makes sense to retrofit, or it makes sense to start looking for another building, or whatever the case may be. I
Great
need to know.
example, San Bernardino, $25 million. They left their city hall and they're now in a business area facility. It was $25 million. They did not have the money to, obviously, to repair. So,
Right. And then there's a larger policy question. There's a lot of buildings of this vintage along Main Street and some of our other corridors. We probably need to know, we probably need to start looking at, do we start to implement something that phases in instead of waiting for adaptive reuse to kick in?
I would just implore you to possibly contact, again, Lucy Jones, who's retired, the seismologist. Again, 3 cities just recently just hired her, Riverside, Malibu, and I don't know, I forgot the 3rd city that they just hired her. And she went around a whole year with me as president of SCAG. That was my top priority, was earthquake, this earthquake initiative. And she put a lot of documents together for the region, but now individual cities are actually hiring her. I would just implore us to take a look, because it's not only City Hall assets, but is also throughout the city, those buildings, and we need to do whatever we can to help those private business owners move towards, seismic retrofitting. And I know it costs a lot of money, but there are incentives and programs out there. San Francisco's utilizing them, Berkeley's utilizing them, and so definitely there are programs that we can utilize and help the private sector with.
Thank you.
And with that, this meeting is adjourned.